Well, first off, let me say thanks for coming in. The reasons why I gave this talk are initially, so people find out that I'm a data scientist at Biogen. The inevitable question always comes up, what do you do at a pharma company for, artificial intelligence? What can you do? What can't you do? What are some of the problems that come along with implementing some of those things? We're not a Google who can take any type of data set, put an algorithm on it, and put it out in the world, because for us, it kind of is a life and death situation sometimes. So what we're talking about today, the topics are patient data and the algorithms, how we kind of merge the two, or how we can merge the two, uptake of our algorithms, how we do that, commercial usage, and research. What I normally say is that data science strategy in this industry at pharmaceuticals and biotech, kind of at a large level, isn't as sexy as it is when you look at marketing or image recognition or some things like that. There are a lot of rules that we have that most other industries don't have, which make it very, very difficult with what we can use. This came out this year. This is 106 startups that are transforming healthcare with AI. This is put together every single year. What I want to know is how many of these companies have changed your life at all? Probably zero. So there are 106 of these. You hear about them all the time, and you say, they are going to change healthcare. They are going to be the next thing to help, kind of progress medicine forward. But for the last 10 years, we really haven't seen that. None of these startups have actually influenced any of your lives at kind of the basic level. When you go into a doctor, you're not interacting with algorithms. The only algorithm that you're really ever utilizing from healthcare is probably WebMD, which is not the best algorithm to actually look at. So for me, I always find this funny, that neural networks, based off biological data, once you get into the pharmacy industry, you can't really use those type of things because you can't explain it to the FDA. The FDA will say, give us your algorithm, show us how it works. If something goes wrong, what can you do to kind of stop it from happening, later on down the line? With neural networks, it's very, very hard to say what went wrong. At what instance did it go wrong? It's not like it's a random forest or something where you can kind of get a general idea of what's going on, or a decision tree, or a regression where you'll know. For a neural network, something that us working in neurological diseases, we know very, very well neurons and how they work. And once it comes to AI, we can't really use those. So the first thing that we kind of have to talk about before we get into kind of the problems is the patient journey, because the patient journey is at the core and the basis of what all of our algorithms are based off of, and kind of how it works. So everyone should pretty much know what your journey is as a patient. We've all gone to the doctors. So first you'll have some symptoms. You'll go see the doctor. You'll do some tests, review. Then you'll go back, consider treatments. Most of us don't actually consider the treatments. We just trust our doctors inherently to kind of have the responsibility for that. We treat and then we monitor. So the questions here are, where is there opportunity for data science and artificial intelligence? And the answer is, at every one of these steps, it's pretty much data, analysis, output. It should be relatively simple on how we can utilize machine learning and artificial intelligence to progress these forward. And then the follow-up question is, what's stopping us? Why, we have all these technologies and we're taking leaps and bounds forward, but we're still kind of in the same old muck when you go to the doctor. Nothing has changed, other than treatments. Nothing's really changed, in the last couple decades. So with the doctor's visits, how it normally happens is you have symptoms, you have medical history, and you have lab results. How it should work is, we put that into an algorithm and we get some type of disease diagnosis. From my point of view, it's probably the most straightforward algorithm you could probably have. Input, output, you're just going to classify what they have, and we're going to have that. But the problem with that is that our expectation is something like IBM Watson. When IBM Watson came out and they won Jeopardy, everyone loved it. And then they said, we're going to get into healthcare. This is going to be the next big step. This is what we're going to get. And this was almost 7-8 years ago where they announced this. And if anyone has ever worked with IBM Watson, more or less they're just a consultant company now, throwing together a bunch of algorithms. You never really see anything that works in the real world with IBM Watson. And what we actually get, the only thing we actually ever use is WebMD. It is an algorithm. It's probably the first thing that most people use when they go online. It's the first thing that always comes up. And so that's what most people think when they think of, some type of medical algorithm. It's WebMD, which, as bad as it sounds, is what most people actually do think of. So patient diagnosis, what we expect versus what is reality. The simple algorithm should be, with the given health information, what are the likely diagnoses? It's a very simple idea for most of us, but once you get into the actual patient and how it works, you now have to deal with the FDA, the integration of real-world data, we'll get into that, the adoption of doctors using that algorithm, which is a huge pain point. You have to have the trust of the patients. They have to trust what's coming out of it. Not all the data is available, and not all the data for all these people are known. So it's now no longer a simple algorithm. You now have to have multiple algorithms and multiple use cases in order to make them work. One thing that most people don't really think about is the FDA and the approval process. The FDA approval process is really, really stringent to get through. So first, every type of algorithm or wearable that's used is called a CADE or CADE device, a computer-assisted detection device. So, if you ever have to wear a heart monitor when you're in the hospital or an EKG or anything like that, that's considered a CADE device. You must show comparable identification of scores with whatever device to whatever a human or whatever the standard of care is. So it's a classification you have to beat, who the radiologist is, something like that. And then also, whenever you do a change to one of these things, at its core, you have to resubmit through the FDA, which takes, again, however many years and dollars in order to do it. It's not a simple process. So on the bottom, I have three kind of subsets which we should talk about. First of all is adaptive learning. With neural networks and kind of these adaptive learning networks that learn as they go on, if the algorithm that they submit, is submitted to the FDA and accepted, if it's learning over time as it gets more and more information from patients, do they have to resubmit? Is it something that you have to resubmit every single time? It's no longer just a static algorithm or device that you're using. It's something that's learning. So how do you deal with that? And is it always trustful? If you learn new things, you could start dropping people out of a classification bin, which you used to keep in them. What do you do with people who already went through the algorithm, things like that? You normally don't track those things, or you can't track them. Human bias. This is big in the medical industry because whenever we make classifications, there's a human bias inevitably in it. It's not whether it's a cat or a dog. It's, what type of cancer do you have? How severe is it? These are all kind of quantitative relative terms, and it's all has a human bias built into it. And then, are we just perpetuating misdiagnoses at this point if we're building an algorithm based on those classifications? And lastly is consistency. For us, what if a standard of care changes? If what we use for a type of cancer treatment or neurological disease changes, will that have to resubmit a new algorithm, or will we have to retrain the algorithm to do something new? It's not as straightforward anymore because healthcare is consistently moving forward, and we have to keep it tractable. And this is evident because in January of this year, the FDA finally approved its first ever cloud-based deep learning in healthcare. It's been around for a while, but it took almost 5 years, half a decade, in order to get the first ever FDA-approved one. And there's only 2 of them right now. So it's a very, very slow process. And while the technology and the mathematics and everything behind it, are taking leaps and bounds forward, the FDA and everything, the paper trail kind of that has to keep up with it, is painfully slow. So every single day we see people using Apple Watches, Fitbits, smartphones, and you can count, the numerous times where you hear a startup pretty much. If you say, health technology and wearables, you probably get $20 million in funding right off the bat, for venture capital. It's that kind of a hot area where people are always taking it. But if you think about it, none of these are ever used in the real world. The major flaws are, one, it's not reliable. If I go for a walk with someone, so my girlfriend's 5 feet, if she takes a walk for a mile and I take a walk for a mile, it'll say that I've only walked, 3/4 of a mile because I'm taking less steps than her, but in reality, we're taking the same amount of steps. So, it's not user by user instances. They're not standardized. So an Apple Watch, when they have a new release and they may update their algorithm or something, that's not standardized. What they're doing, each iterative algorithm, each release is different every single time. So it's not standardized. So your steps in your Apple Watch and your Fitbit, they're using 2 totally separate algorithms, or how they're tracking it. You can't validate the usage. So this is a big one that we often don't think about. If you take your watch off and you take a shower, you're no longer valid. It's no longer the usage of that. It's no longer valid because you took it off. There's external factors that go into the usage. That's why when you go into a hospital and if you ever have, your VO2 max on your finger or something like that, and you take it off, it automatically sets off alarms because, it shows that you pretty much died more or less. What's in the real world, if you're doing medical, kind of monitoring. If you take off, a watch that has to go in the shower or something like that, you can't use it. It's no longer valid. As well, patients can be sporadic. Someone goes on a vacation and they have some type of different usage pattern. They're walking more, they're walking less, all these things. The algorithms aren't changed and specified for each person. So a human being, as most of you know with algorithms, it's a sporadic. So you can't necessarily use it for something that's this important. So this is a quote from Donald Knuth. An algorithm must seem to be believed. This is a huge one when it comes to patients. A patient is used to working with a doctor, not an algorithm. How can you change what they believe in and have them trust in what they're actually interacting with? So do people trust health algorithms? I keep using WebMD as an example because it's a great example. Do people trust it? No, but they are driving up in the revenues of almost $1 billion a year. Why is that? I don't know one person who would go on WebMD and say, I have a sore knee, I have bone cancer right off the bat. That's what you're going to get most of the time. That's the use case. That's what everyone laughs at. So it's not necessarily an algorithm, but everyone uses it every single time. They've adopted that into their life as a first pass of what's wrong with me. So the usage and the revenues are going up, even though it's not necessarily the best thing. Then the question comes, do people trust algorithms? So a lot of papers and a lot of research have gone into, do people trust algorithms inherently? And the answer is, if you see an algorithm performing badly at any given time, you will no longer trust that algorithm in the long term. If a doctor performs badly, you still inherently trust them because you err on the side of human error. It happens. But for us, in our minds, computers and algorithms shouldn't have that error in it, especially when it comes to our health. We'd rather have that human having a, whether it be cognitive bias or training in their sense, make decisions for us. If we want to think about doctors like algorithms, it's the exact same thing as true algorithms. They're going to college and they're going to medical school. That's their training set. They go to residency. That's their test set. The good ones make it through. The ones who kill people don't make it through. And then you put it out into production. You put them out in the hospitals. It's the exact same thing. But their ability to think in our minds, kind of trumps that ability of an algorithm. So what matters is us setting expectations for the patients. We should normally say it's not that we're going to catch every single instance of this. It's not that this will take over, your entire, medical history, the life. But we should say, if you trust doctors, you should also probably trust algorithms for this reason, because they're the exact same thing. And what we think is that hardware usage will begin to wear at this kind of, brick wall that we've set up of, doctors versus algorithms. So this is Fitbit. This is their devices sold, their revenue, and their active users, and you can kind of see their mercurial rise and, recently kind of their, slight fall. But, what makes Fitbit so successful? It's not that difficult of a, device. It's nothing that's, that, groundbreaking. Just a simple algorithm to treat how much you walk, calculate that into calories, and that's pretty much all it is. But you'll see everyone wearing them, and they built that into a billion-dollar industry. We can tailor this the same thing for medical devices. What makes it so that someone will keep wearing a medical device when that's really what matters? And there's really three main things, is gamification. Gamification with themselves. They're now competing with themselves to just do better every day. The more you can gamify a medical device, the better the data is going to be and the better the algorithms are going to be to treat those patients. So this is the same reason why I'll sit there and you'll play Bubble Crush or whatever it is on your phones. You sit there for hours playing, you're not winning anything, but you're gamifying yourself. You're trying to beat yourself. Integration. Fitbits are integrated into our lives. Same thing with Apple Watches. It's connected to your phone, your computer. You can access the data every single place that you look. You want to look at your watch, you want to look at your phone, you want to look at your computer. It is integrated into every single part of your life. You don't think about it after the first week or two. So that's a big one. Same thing with medical history. People are really good at keeping, when they have diabetes, keeping their blood sugar. Why? Because it's relatively easy and you can track it and you can see what's going on over time. It's integrated into their lives. It's not difficult. And the last one is minimization. This is both in the physical and psychological sense. So, you don't have to carry a big, gyrometer around to see, what your steps are. It's relatively small. It's easy. It's physically minimal. Same thing with pacemakers. That's what made it useful, is the minimization. Same thing in the psychological sense. Because you don't think about what's going on and it's integrated into your lives, you're not thinking about it all the time. If it's something that's rather large that you have to think about and see on a daily basis, those algorithms that are associated with those devices just can't work because they're constantly thinking about it. So to come back to the patient journey, what we really need to think about is, who is the customer? For most of us, we think that we're the customer. We're the ones who are, undergoing, whether it be a procedure, taking the drug, or doing any of those things, when in reality, the answer of who's the customer, at least from pharma industries, while you may buy the drug, it's up to the physicians to actually tell you which drugs to take. They are the true customers. They're the gatekeepers to the market. So on the right here, we have the uses. These are from the Physicians Foundation. What it says is it pulled a bunch of physicians and it said, how many patients are you seeing per day and how much are you being overworked from 2012 to 2008. In 2012, over 50% of doctors said that they're at full capacity, and a quarter of them said they're already over capacity. They can't see any more patients. And the reasons for this, if you think, from the payer-provider kind of instances, they're paid by how many people they see. You see more patients, you get more money, it makes things a little bit easier. And most doctors on a given day see between 10 and 30 patients. If you average that for, 10, 15 minutes a patient, if that, we've all been to the doctor and they just walk in, look at your chart, walk out, and it's simple. They don't see you for that long. So to try and think about implicating, physicians to do more things makes it very, very difficult. To get doctors using electronic health records was a huge, huge problem because they just didn't have time. Now you have scribes following around doctors, putting in all the ICD-9, 10 codes, things like that, and it's not the actual doctors who do it. You open up a whole new industry. So physicians have little to no time to practice medicine, let alone bring in these other factors like new algorithms, things like that. And the question I'm posing to you is, what would you like your doctor to do? Learn the new medications that are coming out. Of course you want to learn that. They want them to review literature, stay up to date. Do you want them to pay less attention to you and to rely on an algorithm, or do you want them to take time to understand, that patient that they're seeing? Number 3 is the one that you don't necessarily want them to do. You'd rather have a doctor focus on you and the medicine rather than relying on an algorithm. It's just inherent human bias. And so, like I said, a doctor's job is to collect and analyze data. It's nothing more than that. We put doctors up on kind of this pedestal that they're much smarter than the rest of us, when in reality they're just collecting data, analyzing it, and spitting out a classification of what they think you are. So a lot of times they take genomic data, they take your medical history, they take your symptoms, and they put them all out to bring some type of classification. Well, my question to you is, what happens if we throw in an algorithm? When you train an algorithm, this is changing a little bit with adaptive learning, it takes all these features into account. But the problem is what happens if you lose something? If you lose medical history, if you don't see a certain symptom, if you don't know something about their genetics that could be, that could tell you exactly what's wrong with them. If you lose any one of these things, your algorithm is now performing suboptimally. And a bigger problem is that if you want to take into account all these, you have to show the FDA that you can take all these out and still make the correct kind of prediction. But then again, you're not going to make, a couple thousand algorithms to show that you can do every single case because it's just not worth it. Your company won't get off the ground. You just don't have the resources to do. So it makes it very, very difficult for biotech and pharmaceuticals to get this kind of into place. So hospitals spend big on infrastructure. So over the last 10 years, these are the top 5 EHR, the electronic healthcare record implementations by dollars. So partners, MGH, Mass General Hospital, put in $1.2 billion not 3 years ago, just for their health records, just for the money. Lehigh Valley, Mayo, they're all well north of $100 million. These aren't small integration systems. These are things that change how a hospital works. So what does this tell us? One, if you're in the business of algorithms, partner with Epic. If you see Epic takes all the top ones, at least for the Northeast, Epic takes over everything. What we have to do is develop algorithms around the IT. Hospitals aren't going to say, oh, you have a great algorithm, let's tailor our IT to make it work. What we have to do is take our algorithms and make it work with the IT. It can't go the other way around. They're not as nimble as we are. We're used to spinning up things on AWS, spinning up on the cloud platform on Google, on our laptops. We can spin up clusters. We can't do that with hospitals. Hospitals, for a majority of things, normally don't go to the cloud. It stays on premise because of all the HIPAA violations that could occur and all those different things. So, these type of IT things are very stringent. You can't kind of, expand them and relax them as necessary. And patient history is at the top of mind. Hospitals have recognized that patient history and how the patient has done in the past is very, very indicative of how they should treat them. So they keep this at the top of their mind at all times. So how many people here know their full medical history? I doubt that anyone does. If you've ever moved across the state line, if you've ever changed doctors, if you ever went to college, if your doctor, 20% of doctors don't have any type of EHR system, they still use, paper and fax it around and things like that. I doubt anyone here knows their full EHR history, nor could you get it that quickly. If something drastically went wrong, you had to go the ER, there's not a single button you could push, that would say, give me Adam Jenkins EHR. It's just not there, and you couldn't get that easily. So anything from vaccinations to sicknesses, genetic tests, unexplained events, like you went to the hospital because you passed out but you didn't know why, prescriptions and family history, these aren't readily available to an algorithm. So all those things that you would think that you would need to throw into an algorithm to get a correct kind of output, they're not there. They're not readily available. So all these startups and companies saying that, we're going to change healthcare by predicting, some type of output, whether it be a sickness or any unexplained event, they're really in the fault now because they don't have that data. All these companies are starting to be built off of, a lot of times you'll see them coming out of papers from, like Vanderbilt University, where they have very, very nice EHR systems where you can prove that, okay, this works if you have this data. But once you get in the real world, it's just not really necessary. Same thing with, imaging. Imaging is probably our best bet for utilizing algorithms in the real world. It may not replace, we'll go into this in a little bit, but it will be used in kind of a grand scheme of things. So there are ramifications of this. So, like I said, in 2007, Watson killed Craig Jennings, the smartest Jeopardy players. But now we're 10 years down the line, and MD Anderson just, pulled all the funding, all $60 million. Watson is more or less turned into a consulting company, and you're not seeing, that general uptick that they thought. It's not as widespread as we thought. So, where did this go wrong? One, they tried to build IT to fit the algorithm rather than have the algorithm fit IT. And MD Anderson normally said, I think it was like $6 million right off the bat that they were going to put into place. Now they were north of $60 to $70 million by the end of this when they finally pulled the plug on it. They tried to make a system fit the algorithm rather than the other way around, which they already had in place. And as well, they had unreal expectations. They thought that it was going to be a solve, everything type of algorithm, when in reality it's just a bunch of NLP and other things strung together to try and get, a rational outcome. It works in certain instances. Every so often, Watson will come out with, we solved a case, of why this woman died, of a certain cancer that physicians can figure out. That's just a grand NLP scheme to, how can you figure out what's not there? There's nothing special about figuring out why someone died. The goal is to figure out, to prevent people from dying. But what we can do is look at treatment patterns. So the one nice thing about treatment patterns, and what your doctors think about, kind of history and things like this, we can say, you're on a blood thinner, don't put you on, any type of heart medication because, it could wind up in death. Algorithms can pull those same things out of data, but you don't have to necessarily implement that algorithm in the workplace, in the actual physician's office. So what we can do is, everyone can pretty much buy your EHR data, you just not know it, and we don't know who you are. But, for more or less, you can buy it, if you have enough money. Quintiles, IMS, Truven, Optum, Athena, all these different companies you can buy, your EHR records from. And what you can do is you can start to say, let's build an algorithm to say, these people died, these people didn't. What are the treatment patterns that come out, and the treatment patterns, the flow, how old they are, all these different things. And it'll tell you, these are the, kind of the features that are important. You're pretty much just feature selecting for a patient pattern. And we don't necessarily have to put that into the real world for physicians, but what we can do is then just tell physicians, hey, we're going to do a study and say, we're going to look at these people versus these people, statistically verify it, and then tell physicians this is what we can do. So we're not necessarily saying here's an algorithm that proves everything, but we're saying here's an algorithm that can pull out features that we should really think about, and do further studies on. So pretty much all biotech and pharmas, big pharma companies do this because they're looking to gain that advantage, to convince a physician to use their drug. It's pretty much, one of the top ways which AI is used kind of in the real world. So now we're going to go into kind of commercial applications. So commercial applications of artificial and data science is kind of one of the more common technology uses. It's not only seen by everyone who's not in the industry, but it's one of the most common things, but it still has its problems. So pharmaceuticals is an event-driven market. When you look at things like Amazon, Walmart, any type of consumer industry, it's relatively easy to forecast how things happen. There aren't these huge disruptive events. If you're a pharmaceutical company and you're sitting there and you're waiting for, let's say, a competitor's drug to be approved by the FDA, this could take 6 months to 2 years. You could be waiting. So to build a forecast on that, you now have to build multiple forecasts and figure out, what's the risk stratification of what occurs. And then even then, when it is approved, you may not know what's going to go on, what the adoption rate is going to be. We kind of have some ideas based on historical data, but if you think about it, the amount of drugs that have been approved in the last 20, 30 years isn't necessarily that much when you talk about training algorithms and fitting aroma models and all those things. But what we do know is that it costs about $2.5 billion for every drug to come to market. That doesn't include those drugs that don't make it to market. So when we talk about these huge dichotomous forecasts, whether things work or don't work, everything's highly volatile. So when we start talking about algorithms and implementing them in forecasting, it's a lot of biotechs don't like doing that because if you're wrong, you're really, really wrong. So you have to do more of a market research type of implementation. And then also, who remembers your first ad stock? You either went to go buy shoes, you went to go buy a watch, a ring for your girlfriend, you're on the computer a month later, and it's still following you that you search for that first thing. It's really hard for us to do this in pharmaceuticals. A lot of people say that 60% of machine learning is just marketing and figuring out how you're going to, stratify patients, or not patients, but for you guys, it's just users. It's really hard to do that because you have to assume that everyone who comes to your website is either going to be a caregiver or is going to be a patient. You're not going to go and research a drug if you're not on it. So it's no longer, okay, I have to figure out who you are. It's just, okay, how can we get you to stick to our brand? And as well, the FDA has strict things that you can't do a lot of patient following like this. If you go on and you watch TV, about 75% of all marketing for pharmaceuticals goes through TV. You've all seen the little butterfly floating around, telling you to take, some type of purple pill, or, people running around, because their heart medication works. But when you go online, you don't see those ads pop up a lot because it's not it doesn't work, for that type of marketing. So like I said, only 20-30% of marketing online. We can't create stories. So if from a FDA standpoint and kind of just a moral standpoint, you can't show someone with a disability running around if that disability does not allow you to run around. That is falsifying to your market, and it can be charged in a court of law to say you lied to us. This is what you showed, and it can't happen to that. So we can't create stories. You can't create storylines or anything like that. This doesn't apply to things like Tylenol and Advil that you can get over the counter, because we've all seen Mucinex and that little green gob guy. Those things you can make up as much as you want. But for things that come from your physician, you can't really do anything. Like I said, most of online marketing is geared towards brand retention and support. So it's not how you can get them there, because you can't make someone have a disease, nor would you want them to. What you can do is get them to stick to your brand. So it's all about retention and how you can slow down churn rate, which again is mostly about physician retention. If a doctor tells you to leave, you're going to leave. But if you say you're going to leave, but your doctor says you should really stay, you're still going to stay. So it's not as much about the patients and marketing to them as it is about the doctors. A lot of you guys don't like that pharmaceutical companies can go in and talk to your doctors and say, you should really put them on this. We'll take you out for dinner, let's talk about this. That's really the only form that we have of informing doctors or telling them this brand exists. The sad truth is that your doctors don't know every single brand that's out there. But by us talking to them, this isn't a ploy, it kind of sounds like one, but by this marketing, it's one of the ways that you can get physicians to know that. Because again, physicians don't have time to read every single kind of drug that's out there. It's just not possible. So what we do have a high potential for, and what we do use it for, is data science for operations optimization. So we do send out emails to a lot of people. We know when to send them. We know why to send them, what to include in them to keep them either attending our events or brand retention. So again, it's not something that that we market, but we still do that for patient stratification. So I think this is one of the funniest slides I've ever seen. So this is a couple years ago, Eli Lilly had a race car for diabetes in the South. They did this for one race. It was in the South, which has high rates of diabetes and obesity. Very good marketing tactic. Now everyone knows who's at the racetrack, the 100+ thousand, that Eli Lilly has a diabetes medicine. It doesn't tell you what the medicine is. It doesn't tell you what it does. It just says it's Lilly and diabetes. It's a marketing ploy. It costs them $100,000, a couple $100,000. But now you know what Lilly and diabetes is. It doesn't, that's the type of things that they can do because you can't direct to customer market what your drug is. So I'm sure that you guys will know this from now on, that Lilly has a diabetes drug. So what everyone here normally thinks about when they think about algorithms and pharmaceuticals is usually this area, research and development. And this kind of holds the key to implementing artificial intelligence in the future, on kind of a greater scale. So what a lot of work has been done is with image recognition for early detection or, slides or something of that. So what we have is a lot of, a tumor, a heat map, can we predict what type of, either tumor you have, whether they're amorphous, things like this. This is this will never go to the patient, but this will go to the person who is doing all the testing. We can say, this patient has, this many results, not necessarily this is the drug, but here is a result of our algorithm. They have, the algorithm says that they have, this much amorphous cells out of, their cell sample, those type of things. Where we're not predicting what's wrong with the patient, but we're just giving another metric for a potential disease marker. So that way you're bypassing the FDA to a certain extent because you're not telling them, you're not actually saying what they have, but you're still giving a useful thing. So there are a lot of companies right now that are partnering with radiologists to say, let's make this image recognition part of your radiology suite. So when you go and you look at an MRI, here's a section where the algorithm says isn't normal, doesn't look quite right. You should go in and tell us what it is, but just doesn't look quite right. The problem with that is that if you have a false positive and you say that this region is to blame, and they should be looking at another region, you are now biasing them in the opposite way, and you can cause problems. So these are the kind of the balance of life or death, where do we tell them what they should be looking at, or should we just try and be helping and augmenting them? And the last one for us is genomics. We are using this greatly already. If there is a genetic marker for a disease, that gets fast-tracked to be a drug target no matter what. So trying to determine whether it be through RNA sequencing, DNA sequencing, proteomics, there are a million companies out there trying to do this, to look at, can we just predict who's going to have this disease, such as Huntington's? That was a big one. It's just a simple regression. Number of copies of a gene and your propensity for having disease, they're directly correlated. So it's a simple regression. But we do this in more and more complicated Bayesian networks and hidden Markov models and all these things with genomics to try and predict what are causing these instances. So no longer do we have to do these huge studies where we're just doing mutations upon mutations and hoping to recreate the disease in kind of an animal model. We can now just use machine learning and algorithms and statistics to try and figure out, these are the causes, in kind of a backwards fashion. Yep. Oh, well, perfect. That's my last slide. So if anyone has any questions, go right ahead.
Have there been any major successes in identifying novel mutations and etiologies for disease using that method?
Yeah, so I mean, the classic one is with Manhattan plots and just looking at genome-wide association studies. A recent one from our companies, we just released a drug for spinal muscular atrophy, SMA, and that was using an algorithm probably 5 years ago. It was fast-tracked to look for genetic mutations, and it's a single one. What it's really good for is when you have multiple mutations. It's not a single factor, but multiple factors coming together, because single disease mutations are relatively simple. The successes that we normally see are when we're looking downstream of changes. So single changes are easy to tell what it's going to do. But what's really hard to tell is what's the effect on the entire network. So there's a lot of networking and graph theory that goes into how all 12,000 genes are changed, all their transcripts and things change over time. So while it may not come to, this is going to solve the disease and this is not. A lot of times it's going to be this one's safe and this one isn't safe because of what's going to go on. So a lot of the things that don't make it never make it to trial, so you don't really hear about it.
So in those more complex cases with more complex diseases, because the simple single mutation cases, those are rare, right?
Yep.
Because they're going to be selected out. So have there been any successes with complex disease?
Complex disease, no. I mean, we've been going for it for a while, and we have made, a lot of times, you see a lot of incremental increases. You keep seeing diabetes medications come out, you keep seeing heart disease medications and things come out. That's due to a lot of these type of models, machine learning models, where you start seeing, we're not going to cure it necessarily, but we know that changing this will make an incremental, you'll now see the downstream, Markov chain of what, when you start to come together and kind of, homeostasis, what happens. As we look downstream factors, that's when you normally see, a company coming out with like 3 drugs over like 4 or 5 years because they know exactly kind of how that stream is going. So I wouldn't say that we're going to necessarily see, a huge breakthrough with them, but you can definitely make incremental changes using these methods. Yeah.
I'm curious about resource allocation.
Yeah. In what
So
way?
yeah, on the data science team that you're on, like how do you allocate time across projects? Do you work, you mentioned some retention and marketing, but also development and discovery. So how, in terms of how the company allocates resources, how does that work out?
Yeah, so it really depends. When there's a problem, it's all hands on deck. If there's a product that's decreasing share and you have to figure out why, the team will get off what they're going, what they're working and going through it. It's pretty split up with what you like to do. So we kind of have the resources where we can say, you like R&D, you like research, that's your background, so you can go do that. Whereas if you like more commercial or marketing, you can do that type of things. The problem with, we kind of have to keep the two separate because often the people who know the research can't do the business side of it. We normally find that, business and commercial data scientists are normally harder to come by. Just because they're not necessarily ingrained, as Jeremy said this morning during the keynote. Not a lot of them are kind of in tune with what the business problems are. So for us, it's normally we have 3 or 4 people working on kind of the research at any given time, and normally 3 or 4 people working on the commercial side at any given time.
Got it. And people typically stay on sort of one side of the equation. That was going to be my
No,
follow-up
sometimes
question.
people change. Depends. So a lot of us do have scientific backgrounds. Just because, again, it's easier for us. That's why we're in the industry. But yeah, sometimes we bounce back and forth. If you get tired of one or the other after a year or 2, you can bounce back and forth.
Cool. Thanks.
Yeah.
So earlier in your presentation, you mentioned that you can't just use a typical neural network because it needs to be explainable for regulatory reasons. But so I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about how you solve that problem, what kind of models you use, or how you address that.
So the FDA is starting to relax the rules on that, which is, in February, like I said, they released, the deep learning on the cloud. They let that happen. So traditionally, the FDA, in typical government fashion, is old-fashioned. You will constantly hear it has to be a validated system. So, SAS is our enemy. We hate using SAS. We don't use it. But anything that makes a business decision a lot of times or has a medical implication has to be able to be auditable. So, it has to be, the government has to be able to come in, put their own stuff through it, and it comes out the way it should. It has to be auditable. With neural networks and adaptive learning, again, that makes it difficult because it's changing over time, and what you release is not necessarily what's out in kind of the wild. So in a traditional sense, a lot of times what we do is, we make a neural network or we do something of the sort. We make predictions, we make treatment patterns from it, which is which it's really good for with LSTMs. But then what we do with those is we take those results and we put them through classical methods. We put them through, risk propensity, and all these different things to just prove statistically that these are different cohorts and that, our algorithm is supported by, those other underlying factors. So we're not directly proving what it is, but we're proving what its outputs are and that it is, significant. So, yeah, it's kind of how we have to do it. One question over here. Yep. How's the real world evidence?
Yeah.
Every single step is real world evidence. You can't necessarily make up a mock data set, for a patient. We physically and morally can't say, let's oversample, a patient data set, and make up new hypothetical patients, because that's not what you're going to see. You can't do that. And if you try and do that, people will say, that's a fake person. We're not going to do that. So all of, we track, for packages, we know exactly who's getting our drug at each time. We can say, we know what your adherence is. You'll often hear that adherence is the main issue when people are taking drugs. So we can start to build that into, okay, here's a patient. We know, they're on one of our apps. We know what they're using. We know how their drug is weaning. Have they searched for something on our application or on our website? Is there, adherence weaning, from taking our drug and things like that? And we can start to build models off of that. But what we can't do is we can never marry, this is kind of the holy grail of what we wish we could do is, we can never marry your medical history with what you're doing, what we can monitor. It'd be great if we could, but we can't, because a lot of times that would give us the real insight. What there are a lot of, there are a couple companies trying to do this is, they'll take people's electronic health records, they'll take a huge bin of them, and they'll manipulate it statistically so that you will never know each individual person. You could go and look at an individual person, but it doesn't look anything like a normal person. But when you do the statistics on them as a whole, they come out correct. So, it's almost using cryptography for, a patient base, more or less, to try and, to get that. So real world evidence, we use it a lot for, risk analysis and things like that. But if you're thinking about, real world EHR and things like that, we can never marry that back to our actual patients. Yeah.
How can you combine the patient heterogeneity data to come up with novel insights, specifically in lifestyle modification diseases?
Can you repeat that again, a little louder?
Lifestyle modification diseases, obesity, diabetes, and so on. And then the patient heterogeneity in terms of what kind of drugs they are taking, what kind of symptoms they are taking, they have, and their genetic profile.
Yep.
So it's so varied. So you have because there are so many parameters, you can't really have a unique patient pool.
Yeah, so
in
for
my mind.
that, Verily, Google's life sciences offshoot, they have huge products for this. You can spend $30 million and get 5,000 Parkinson's patients, all their genomic information, their medical history, their wearable history. They've had them wear wearables. That size of work is really, really difficult, like you said. And like I said, with the wearables and that type of lifestyle modification, it's extremely difficult to tell whether they're actually changing their lifestyle. For us, what we assume for lifestyle modifications is, if they come back in a year or 6 months and their numbers are either A, worse, or B, the same, assume that they're a zero and that they haven't taken their drugs. That's what you can really do. With its the heterogeneity, at that point, you're just looking at power analysis. You just have to make sure that you get enough people, which for us, because we're in a little bit of a rare disease space, that's difficult for us. But for Lily and people with diabetes, they can do studies where they recruit 100,000 patients relatively simply. So for heterogeneity for us is a big problem. But for other companies, it's not that big of an issue. And once you're trying to marry up all those different type of wearables and other things, that's just, do you have the resources to get all that stuff done? Yep. No question.
What's hard about for the data scientists to work on the business side of it? You mentioned that a couple of questions ago.
Yeah, they don't understand ROI. At a basic thing for us, it's because it's such an event-driven market, and if something goes wrong, it goes wrong in a big way. You constantly have to monitor your ROI. And so for a scientist who's working in R&D, they're constantly saying, this is interesting, I want to work on it. For me, I understand the worth in it. I would never understand why someone would cut my group or wouldn't see the return on investment. Whereas data scientists who work in commercial and other industries, they kind of understand that there are going to be some hard decisions you have to make that aren't necessarily data-based, but more just, numbers based, or, whether it's an economical or not. For me, it's, if you're in the mindset of I just want to discover, R&D is great. If you've lost a little bit of your soul, if you will, you can work in business a little bit. So that's normally what I see as the hardest part for a lot of people. Yes? Great. Thank you very much.